Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, Creating Positive Change, an Appreciative Inquiry Approach for Courageous Leaders. The presenter of today's webinar is Cherie Millen, and she's the Director of Studies from Curtin English at Curtin University. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. If you can hear me and see the PowerPoint slide with Cherie's photograph on it, can you please type in yes? Okay, I'm getting lots of yeses, so thank you very much for that. I'll just tell you a little bit about Cherie before she starts. So as I said, she's the DOS at Curtin English in WA, and she's also a CELTA trainer. And last year, she won the English Australia Award for Academic Leadership. And this was for a project that she'd implemented in her staff room to create a cultural change around the approach to professional development. And our judges thought that Cherie showed a strong and sustained commitment to changing the professional development culture in her school and to creating a strong community of practice at her school as well. Cherie has a really keen interest in leadership, which is great. And when she's not at work, she actually runs marathons and is a long course triathlete. So handing over to you now, Cherie.
Thanks, Sophie. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today in the webinar. As Sophie, let me see. I'm just trying to forward the PowerPoint, but it's not moving.
Okay. Try again. Yep.
Okay. Okay. So as Sophie said, why me? So I'm the DOS at Curtin, and one of the things that we've been working on here at Curtin is a change in culture. So there was a change in culture at my centre from a very toxic culture where managers and teachers were not in alignment at all. And we've moved towards being a very strong learning organisation where there's a focus on growth and there's a committed team. And the Guide to Best Practice in Managing Professional Development is there because that story is the case study one in that guide. And again, as Sophie mentioned, the Award for Academic Leadership was around that cultural change. And over the last 3 or 4 years of that process, what happened for me is that I realised that change management frameworks and that traditional view of creating and managing change just wasn't enough and it wasn't working. And that led me then to explore transformational change and apply those main principles to what we were doing at Curtin. And one of those principles is trial and error. So I want to make it really clear from the start that I'm not an expert and that what I want to share with you today are some of the things that I found useful in our journey and in our context at Curtin. So as the title conveys, there are 3 areas of focus in this webinar, and these are the key ideas that I've encountered and applied. So first of all, transformational change. We'll have a look at what that is as opposed to developmental or transitional change and explore that a little bit. And then we'll look at what it means to be a courageous leader and how that can help with the type of change that we want to create. And lastly, we'll look at appreciative inquiry as a tool for co-creating change. So this combination of 3 things for us at Curtin English was a very powerful model for developing what became a very positive community of practice. So there are different types of change, and the first one here on the left is developmental change, and that's the simplest type, and it's basically improving, developing, enhancing the current state. So this is possibly in evidence at your school or your centre now. It's definitely in evidence at ours, and it takes the form of changes and tweaks to the syllabus or changes to assessments based on teacher-student feedback, that kind of thing. So it works and it's a valuable method and useful kind of change. So the second is transitional change, and that's again moving from that old state to a new state with the transition period. It's well recognised, and again it's probably in evidence at your centre as well. So at this point we're currently changing our ELICOS curriculum using this model. So basically it's out with the old, and then in 2017 it will be in with the new. So again, there's nothing wrong with this kind of change, it just is something we're quite familiar with. So the traditional change management model is sufficient to manage these two types of change. And if you research change management, you'll likely get something that includes these stages. So a decision is made by someone at the top, some authority, and it's fed down to those who are going to be affected by the change. Hopefully there's an opportunity for feedback up again. The resistance is managed, and there will be resistance because there always is when people are not fully engaged in the decision-making process. And the last thing would be that there's a process to ensure that compliance happens. So what these two types of change have in common is that you can determine the destination before you begin, and therefore you can manage that transition. And the other thing is that people are impacted at the level of skills and the level of actions, and not necessarily, or not at all, at the level of mindset and behaviour and culture. So transformational change is quite different, and it's not so easy to manage using that traditional change management model. It's far more challenging, and there are two reasons for this. So firstly, with transformational change, the future state is not known, and it's determined through trial and error as new information is gathered and comes in. And the other reason is that the future state is so radically different than the current state that the people and the culture have to change as well. So that makes this very complex and unpredictable and uncontrollable. So for those two reasons, change can't be managed. It can't be managed with that traditional model that we looked at before. It can't be managed in a time-bound and a linear way. So you can have an overarching change strategy, and that's what's there at number 1 there, that takes into account the content of the change, the people and the processes. But the actual change process literally must emerge as you go. And that means that managers and directors and teachers must operate in the unknown, and that can be quite a scary place to be. The second point on this slide here is that the future state will be so radically different from the current state that the people and the culture must change to implement it successfully, and new mindsets and new behaviours are required. And Anderson and Anderson argue that in fact a shift of mindset is required even to begin a transformational change. So this is a table from Anderson and Anderson, as you can see at the bottom there, and their basic premise is that mindset is causative, and that determines what human, cultural and process dynamics we see and we don't see, and it determines our internal reaction to the seen and the unseen dynamics. And so it also determines the change leadership style and the change strategies that we use and the results that we get. So for example, the bottom left-hand side there, you'll see scarcity. So if you're seeing scarcity, then you'll compete. Whereas if you're seeing abundance, you'll cooperate, for example. So traditional change management models come from the industrial mindset, and they're very reactive. So the industrial mindset is that traditional, logical, Western paradigm that we're all familiar with, and it's the mindset of governments and corporations. It's that survival of the fittest, the patriarchy, its hierarchical levels, and its logic. So the blind spot in all of this is the human and the cultural dynamics that can occur, or that do occur, in human interactions. So the emerging mindset sees the people and the processes at play, and they become the focus of this mindset, and they do drive organisations. So what we're looking at here is that idea of bottom-up, emergent behaviour, equality, focus on feedback and communication, and inclusion. So the emerging mindset is a reflective and conscious approach, and it looks at the internal as well as the external. their other premise is that the mindset of individual leaders can translate into the culture of the organisation. So basically, they're saying that culture is the function of people's mindsets. So take a second, if you will, to think about your own workplace for a minute and what types of comments you hear or are more common in your workplace. So what kind of comments do you hear from your boss and from your team, and what kind of comments do you make to those people that you manage? So we as leaders and managers have to be aware that our own mindset, aware of our own mindset, and see clearly how that is governing the decisions that we make and our own behaviours. And the evidence of this, I think, can be seen on the impact the decisions are having on the way your team behaves and the kinds of communication that's present in your team. So for us at Curtin English, the old Curtin English was very much on the left side of this slide. So how does mindset apply to leadership? Well, on the left here, we've got an example of transactional leaders. And transactional leadership is an exchange process between leaders and followers, and it focuses on reward. So, for example, if you elect me, there'll be no new taxes. If you do this job well, you'll get a promotion. If you hand in a good piece of work, you'll get a good grade, that kind of thing. So it's a common and traditional view of leadership, and it comes from this industrial mindset. So that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is transformational leadership, which changes the leader, and it focuses on a higher good, and it has an ethical basis. So with transformational leadership, the vision touches the followers and pulls them into supporting and co-creating the vision. So there's a challenge to the status quo, and there's always a step into the unknown, but that's based on moral values and the greater good and moving beyond what's expected. And this kind of leadership transforms the leader as well as the organisation or the situation. So the leader is still out in front, but leadership in this model is a process, and it's an interplay between leaders and followers. And so Gandhi is really the obvious example of this type of transformational leader. At Curtin English, the greater good that we were working towards in our cultural change was student outcomes. So better teaching, having positive results for the students. And in the process of this, the teachers and the managers felt better about themselves, and they all had something to contribute to the development of the whole. So when new staff join our centre, they're often surprised by the positivity and the work focus in our staff room. That doesn't mean to say there aren't grumbles and issues and things come up, but the big difference is that there's a strong focus on working towards a positive solution rather than complaining and blaming, and it's always a team effort. And I'm really always amazed at how well such a large team of people work together and support each other. And we do feel good about ourselves and what we're working to create. So even though we may not be Gandhi, we can still lead a process of transformation. So there are two key ideas to bring to the process. You don't need to look at it in great detail, but the two key ideas are, one, that the outcome is emergent. So you begin the change effort without knowing precisely where you're going. And it's this idea of letting go of the trapeze before the new trapeze swings into sight. So, and the key here is just high involvement, and high involvement of the whole team. So as you look at this model, think about how Gandhi precipitated change. So the other difference is that the process is shared with others. So it's a co-creation, in contrast to the previous standard change management model that starts with the decision made at the top and ensuring compliance at the bottom. Okay, so we've explored the type of change that we move to create, and that is transformative change. So now let's look at the type of leader that we need to be to create this. And Sophie is going to give us a poll to do before we get on to the next one. Okay, so if you can select which of these leadership attributes you think is the most important, just put a tick in one. Is that working, Sophie?
It is. I'm still 80% have voted. Okay, I'll close it off now and share the results with everybody.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. Communicates openly and often. Strategic vision. Nurtures growth, okay. And what isn't there is confidence and experience or strong ethics. All right. Can we switch back to the slide? Thank you. It's not responding to me. Here we go. Okay, so this is from a study of 195 leaders in 15 countries over 30 global organisations done by the Harvard Business Review. And in contrast to our poll, very, very different results. So I'll let you just have a look at this for a minute and notice what is in fact the highest value. So like our poll, there's no mention of experience, knowledge or confidence here. And they're the types of things that we value when we assess our political leaders, for example. So they tend to be values of transactional leaders. Instead, there's a really strong focus here on values and ethics. And there's a growth mindset and a relationship. So interesting that values and ethics didn't come up in our little poll. So if we take those things and we overlay the emerging mindset, it looks a bit like this. So the emerging mindset was very much about the greater good and bringing values and positive change. And that's also in line with what the survey of the global leaders showed. So co-creation and participation is part of that emerging mindset, the idea that we are equal and that we value feedback and inclusion. So the emerging mindset talks very much about continuous processes leading to more continuous processes, and this is around that growth mindset and continuous learning. The emerging mindset and transformational change taps into our own moral values and the greater good and the need of individuals to have something to aspire to and to contribute, and the idea of wholeness and relationship. So there's a strong connection between what global leaders are saying is a valuable leadership quality and transformational leadership. So characteristics of good leaders are great, and we can acknowledge them and perhaps aspire to them, but what steps can we take to get there, we as people in our schools in Australia? So this isn't a plug for a book, but it is acknowledgement of a fantastic author and facilitator, Mandy Holloway, and I was lucky enough to attend a workshop with Mandy, and I learnt so much that I've been able to put into practice. Mandy was a leader in the corporate world, and she became really disillusioned with the examples of leadership that she was seeing. So she branched out on her own and developed her own model and created inspiring, courageous leaders. So the main focus of her work is being our authentic selves at work, which then frees others to be their authentic selves at work and engage with others through an emerging mindset rather than that hierarchical industrial model. So authenticity is the first thing. The second thing is adopting a total belief in abundancy instead of the current view that is pretty much mostly one of scarcity. So abundance means enough for everybody, and it's connected to generosity. So abundance, authenticity, and then combine this with real transparency, which means that everyone is free to share what they're really thinking and feeling with everyone else, and that leaders are prepared to show how they make decisions and that they share information freely, and then together explore what becomes possible. So authenticity, abundance and generosity, and transparency. So again, think of Gandhi when you think about this model. He was his authentic self, and that was probably the most powerful thing about him. So authenticity is all about behaving in a way that's consistent with your values. If you find yourself making decisions that feel at odds with your principles or justifying actions in spite of your discomfort, you probably are not connecting with your core values. and others in your organisation also need to be able to work in a way that's consistent with their core values. So we need to bring courage to the workplace. So it's really important to increase feelings of safety and work on communicating with the specific intent of making people feel safe. So one example of accomplishing this is acknowledging the fears or consequences from the beginning of a conversation, clearing the air. So for example, you might approach a conversation about a project that's gone wrong by saying, I'm not trying to blame you, I'd just like to understand what happened, for example. So taken together, these attributes of authenticity, abundance and generosity and transparency are all about creating a safe and trusting environment. So add to that a leader with high ethical standards, and that conveys a commitment to fairness and instills confidence in the leader and in confidence and a safe place and a safe environment for employees and teachers and general staff, which means that all of the people in a workplace can relax, and once they've relaxed, that means that their capacity for social engagement and innovation and creativity and ambition can all come into play. So for us on a day-to-day basis in our schools, we can do the 4 things that are in this slide, and we can do it with authenticity and an attitude of generosity and transparency. So Mandy talks about this wedge of fear versus the courageous space, and the wedge of fear is very much in that industrial mindset type of space where there's discontent and there's blame and defensiveness and justification, all of those things that we're probably very familiar with, and we can see on TV all the way through this election period. This is basically what it's all about. So what's needed to move into that courageous space is vulnerability. So bringing absolute truth to the conversation and being able to share ideas and feelings and true thoughts is what creates transparency. And so then there is a space of courage to share and courage to listen, and that's what builds deep trust. So there's a lot of work to do in achieving this, and the book that I showed you before is very useful in terms of giving really concrete examples and steps to do that. But one of the key things, and one of the very foundations of this approach is real conversations. So real conversations means conversations that are unhurried and they're uncluttered and they're held at the right time to create a right impact, and there's no hidden agenda. And real conversations are essential to building a high performance culture, because you as a leader demonstrate what's important and you enable that transparency. So a real conversation is where you delegate work, where you give feedback, where you support performance, receive feedback, mentor career, coach for performance, resolve conflict, share knowledge, insights, feelings. So real conversations need to happen where there's space, you need to be totally present, and every conversation has to be held like this. So I can hear you saying in your head, that's fine in an ideal world, but I don't have time for real conversations. I'm so busy. And that was something that I was experiencing as well. So this is Stephen Covey's time management model. You may be familiar with this. The left side is the important or not important tasks, and the bottom is urgent or not urgent. So for example, a not important but urgent something is an interruption. So I'm not sure about you or your organisation, but we used to work predominantly in the left side. Everything was either an interruption or a crisis, and I'd pretty much say 80% of my time was there. And this can be the result of an open door policy. So being available to anyone at any time can mean operating in crisis mode, firefighting, fixing errors, reacting to requests, solutions to problems, deadlines, interruptions. And none of these things are traits of great transformational leaders, if we think back to the earlier slide. So we need to work towards something that looks a bit more like this. So get rid of the idea that you as a leader are always available and schedule your time. And this actually creates more space for real conversations and for planning and development and for thinking time. It can take a while for people to get used to it, especially if you've had an open door policy and now you're closing your door and not being available. But once it's explained and that you continue to allocate time for real conversations, and that means delegation conversations, supporting and coaching conversations, feedback conversations that are regular and scheduled, and that you're completely present in those conversations, then people will appreciate this. And once you do this, it frees others to be able to do this, and the whole organisation becomes far more productive. So courageous leaders, then, to sum up, are authentic, which allows others to be authentic. They have real conversations and they schedule time. So they're the kind of 3 quick and easy takeaway points from Mandy's model, which is far more complex. You can see that in the corner of the slide there. So just to recap where we are at the moment, we've looked at the kind of change we want to create and who we need to be and who others in our team need to be to create space for this kind of transformational change. So now I want to look at a tool for involving everyone in envisioning and creating that change. So that tool is appreciative enquiry, and this is something that comes out of the States, and it's based on managing performance and doing performance review. The way that we've used it at Curtin English is as a strategic thinking tool, and we've used it to create a different mindset in the team and focus on the things that we do well and build on those. So the basic premise there, as you can see in the diagram, is that we look at the assets, look at what we do right, look at what we do well, rather than look at what we don't have or what's missing or what the problems are. And taking this on as a way of looking at the world for us has had an impact on our centre in that we encourage each other to think differently, and we encourage each other to take a positive perspective and avoid negativity. So looking at this in just a little bit more depth, so where we usually, or where the Western world kind of sits, is in this deficit-focused problem-solving orientation, where we look at the current state and we look backwards to what's gone wrong and look at solving the problem and asking the question, how do we fix it? Whereas appreciative inquiry is future-focused, so it looks at where we are and where we want to be and how do we get there in terms of what we want to develop, what's possible, what we want to achieve. It's quite a shift in thinking. It looks fairly simple here, but many of us are used to a past orientation and problem solving, and I think many of us in our jobs probably got there because we're really good at problem solving. So looking at this type of orientation takes practice and consistency, and to do it on a larger scale you need tools in order to focus. But it's also very much in line with an emerging mindset, what's possible in abundance. So just a little bit more about appreciative inquiry as a theory. So 2 basic principles, the anticipatory principle, which says that deep change is a change in active images of the future. And to me that basically is the same thing as transformational change. And the other principle is the positive principle. So it basically says the more positive the question or topic, the greater and long-lasting the change. So we use this as a framework for exploring future possibilities at Curtin English. So what we did is in our last staff big day out, we call it, last year, we basically looked at what we were going to do to transform different aspects of our centre. So this is the model that you use, so that strong positive core and an affirmative question, so something that is going to be inspiring and useful rather than a problem. So for example, what we used was the topic choice was community, Curtin English community. So that's not a problem, that's something that we want to develop, and it's something that's existing already. So the first step is discovery, so appreciating what is. And so we brainstormed that and we realised that we had, some fantastic assets, students engaged, mix of nationalities, staff with lots of skills and interests, etc., etc. And then we dreamt together or brainstormed the possibilities for the future. What did we want to build on and create? And so what we wanted is in a welcome, vibrant place where students are excited to be, etc., etc. So the next stage is the design. So we came up with many, many different ideas, and this is just an example. So we wanted students to have a welcoming place. So one of the things that we could put in is, how are you settling in, to make sure that we're catering and making sure students do feel welcome. And then in delivery, that idea turns into, in week 1, the student experience officer is going to run a giant Lego session for all new students and invite the coordinators and the senior teachers, and they get to, you know, have fun in this ridiculous activity, and we get to check in and make sure that they're okay. So that's just a really quick and simple example of the whole staff getting together to create some change and some ideas that we want to put in place. Something else I want to show you that came out of that big day out is working on values. So Curtin University puts out, you know, Curtin values basically, and you can see those there on the left. And what we did is added our values in practice on the right. And this is, for me, the reason I'm showing you this is it illustrates a willingness to engage with the emerging mindset, even though it actually wasn't set up that way. So it's very different from the hierarchical view. This is created by staff and for staff. And my favourite is, I think, number 6, which is feel free to disagree with or challenge what someone has said. So there is an acknowledgement that conflict is valuable and it's a space for change. And this is the courageous space and not the wedge of fear. So yeah, I just wanted to show you that. So there's some empirical evidence. Actually, hang on, sorry. If we bring it back to our context of Curtin English, this cultural shift over 4 years to a community of positive community of practice. And this is in our strategic plan, as shown in our mission statement there. So this community of practice and sustaining that community has developed by this shift in focus, and it's self-sustaining, and we've got a framework to support it. And what has happened is that we have courageous participants across the whole community. And yeah, this is the empirical evidence of this change. So this is the staff university-wide survey, and this is 2014. And just what I want to point out here is the difference in number 1, encouraged to give feedback about things that concern me. So that's 87% in 2014, which I think is great. I'm hoping that in 2016 it's higher again. But there's a shift from only 54% in 2012. And the third one there, my local manager listens to staff, is 91% in 2014, and it was 55% in 2012. So that for me shows that there's been a cultural change in the way that we relate to each other, and I put that down to having those real conversations and having a safe space. So I'll let you just read this last quote. So for me, this sums up the ideas that I've attempted to convey here. The opportunity for us to breathe life into our schools and to co-create transformational change. So as leaders in our teams, we have the opportunity to breathe life into our schools and create possibilities. And that is exciting and positive and very worthwhile. So that's all I have to share with you. There's resources there that you can have a look at if you're interested in exploring any of these ideas any further. So thank you for attending, and I'll hand you back to Sophie.
Okay, well, we're going to take, Cherie's going to take some questions now. So if you have any questions, can you please type them in, and I'll relay them to Cherie. And just so you know, when you type in your questions, I'm the only one who can see them. You can't see each other's questions, in case you're feeling a bit confused about that. All right, there's some questions coming in now. Okay. So the first question, Cherie, I like that transformational leadership also leaves opportunity for mistakes and learning. Will the end result be clear at the start? And how do we show vision to followers when it's emergent?
Okay, good question. And that's that scary space of not quite knowing where you're going. So when I think about showing vision, I think about Gandhi. So if we think about that process, I don't know if I can flick back through the slides here.
I'll try to do that for you.
Have I got it, Sophie?
I think I've got it, so I'll go back to Gandhi.
Yep. Go back to the circle, the process.
Okay. That one?
That one. Yeah. So if you think about Gandhi, so he heard the wake-up call and he stepped forward to say, okay, I'm going to do something about this. So he didn't have an idea at the end. He knew what he wanted to achieve, but he didn't know how he was going to get there, and he didn't have a ready-made group of supporters. So the actual moral argument is what created that vision, and he didn't manufacture it and get other people to sign on. He just went ahead and did it, and then a group of people were inspired by what he was trying to achieve and joined him and then started co-creating that change. And there were all sorts of learning and course correcting, if you want to call it that, along the way. So it's a different idea around needing to know what your end point is. You need to know what you're wanting to achieve, but you don't necessarily end up with what you envisioned in the start. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, it does for me. Perhaps the person who's asking it could just type in whether they feel it's been answered. Yes, thanks.
Yeah. I think that, operating in that space of we're okay with things going wrong because we know what we want to achieve, and that's the appreciative inquiry thing. So you're not setting out to solve a problem, you're setting out to achieve a dream or a vision or whatever you want to call it. And then whatever happens on the way is going to be okay because everybody's involved in it and you're all working towards the same goals.
Okay. There's another question. I'm still unclear about the term abundance. What does it really mean in the context of transformational leadership?
Abundance is can we go back to the mindset table, Sophie?
Yeah, sure. That one?
A bit further back. That one. No.
Oh. That one?
That one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So abundance is part of a way of looking at the world. So really clear example is contrasting it with scarcity. So if you see there's only a limited pie, for example, then you're going to compete for a bigger portion of that pie. Whereas if you see that the pie itself could grow and expand and that there's enough for everybody, then you're not in a competitive frame of mind, you're in a cooperative frame of mind. So abundance doesn't mean anything except a different way of viewing the world. So how you want to take that then and apply it to other areas depends on the specifics. But in terms of leadership, if you think about abundance being there's enough for everybody, then to me that converts into generosity. So what you're doing is you're approaching all your conversations with people in this spirit of generosity, that it's okay, there's enough. So it's a shift in mindset, and when people are approached with generosity, that creates safety. There's no blame, there's no competition. It's a shift in perspective.
Okay. There's another question. Transformational change is clearly all about not necessarily knowing what the end result is going to look like. But when there's a change management project, we all normally work to deadlines. Is it simply that each stage might take longer, but the end result, rather than the change implementation date, is unknown?
There's two parts to that. We work to deadlines, and what was the second part, please, Sophie?
Okay, so with the change management project? Is it simply that each stage might take a bit longer, but that the end result is unknown?
Okay. I'll just apply this to our own experience at Curtin English. So 4 years ago, I looked at the situation that we had, and I thought, right, there needs to be a whole change in mindset in this staff room. And what we could do right now here is this thing. So we put something in place, and that was designed to get people to connect with an idea, and the idea was improving student outcomes. So everyone could rally around that idea, that kind of greater good, if you like, and have opportunities to contribute to that through different things that we were doing. So that same idea is still in progress now, 4 years later, and I had no idea at the beginning where we would be now. I just knew that I wanted to shift the mindset that we had that was operating then. So there were little projects along the way, and they developed, and there were offshoots, and then some didn't work, and they were dropped, and other people picked things up. And so at this point, I'm not driving any of what's going on in terms of our professional development and any of that project anymore, because other people are taking it on and doing that. So yes, there are things that you need to put in place, and there are deadlines around that, but there's also got to be that flexibility that you're just going to see what emerges and see, what offshoots might appear and which kind of tangents you might want to take along the way, and what other innovations occur during that process. If it's something that you really want a particular outcome, then transformational change is probably not the model you want to use. You might want to just be using a development or a transitional change model, depending on what your focus is, because transformational change really is around changing the mindset around a particular area.
Okay, great, thanks. This is another question that I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about. Was upper management supportive of your vision for transformative change?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so this comes down to having real conversations, and real conversations are not top down. Real conversations are with everybody in your organisation. So being vulnerable, getting into that space of saying, okay, I'm going to be authentic, and I'm going to be transparent, and I'm going to be generous with everybody, and that includes my boss, is the way you go with that. So once you start being real and you allow vulnerability to happen, and you get to say what you really think and feel, then that works both ways. So people start to relate to each other in different ways. So I can say yes, that there is support from my boss and his boss, because we've set it up so that we're relating with each other in a bit of a different way. So we've moved a little bit into the emerging mindset, as opposed to that kind of hierarchical, logical, industrial mindset of power and control. So we're much more in the co-create and participate side of that table than we are in the power and control. And that has been part of the cultural shift that we've had. So it gets more difficult if you don't have proximity. So, for example, my boss's boss, I don't really get to communicate with, so I rely on my boss to transmit that vision to him. So, the bigger the machine, I guess, the harder it is to touch every part of it. But the short answer is yes, we have created agreement, I guess, with the management. Yeah.
All right. Are there any other questions?
It's difficult though, because it really does take courage to show yourself to be vulnerable, especially when, and in my situation, I was really new to the role of Director of Studies when I took this on, and I had to stop myself being somebody who I thought I should be in this role, and I had to just move to, actually, no, I'm just going to be me, no matter what, and no matter what situation, I'm just going to be me, and I'm going to be authentic about what I want and what I feel and how I want to communicate. And that was challenging, and there were setbacks along the way, obviously, but Yeah, and I think we've created a space, I know we've created a space where everybody who works here can be their authentic selves at work. And that's just so wonderful.
Yeah. There's actually another question related to that, which was how did you work on staff having a generous and positive outlook?
Well, it was a combination of these three things that I've been talking about today. It was that idea of we're going to work on transforming how we view the world, and we're going to be courageous in our conversations with each other, and we're going to take on this forward asset-based way of looking at our future. So we don't get bogged down in problem solving and looking at the past and trying to fix what went wrong. I mean, occasionally we do, because there's a big shift in that change to change the way you think. But those three things in combination were how we got there.
And did
Can you say the question again? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was just how did you work on generosity and having a positive outlook in the staff room?
Well, that vision of the student experience and improving outcomes for students is what everyone could get behind. So the teachers weren't. It wasn't introduced as, hey everybody, there's a really toxic culture here and we need to sort this out. It was introduced as, okay, what do we want to achieve at this centre? This idea of this dreaming into existence. What are our strengths and what is our dream? So our dream is that our students are all going to be really successful and achieve, their outcomes and move on to the pathway. So that's what the staff can get behind. And then we start to work together in order to create that. So alongside that as kind of the project, that also brings with it a transformational change, because it's working to the higher good. Everyone can contribute, everyone can get involved. It's emergent because we don't know how we're going to get to these amazing student outcomes. We just know that that's what we want to achieve, and that we're all connected to that same goal.
Okay.
And the generosity then is around how we deal with the setbacks and how we deal with the ideas and how we deal with each other along the way. So vulnerability is part of that. So I as someone who was driving this in the early stages, needed to be absolutely available to receive criticism and negativity and feedback from individuals who didn't like or didn't want to do what we were doing. So for me, that was to say, okay, I'm just going to be available to listen, and I'm not going to judge, and I'm not going to defend, and I'm not going to justify what we're doing. I'm just going to hear what you're saying, and I'm going to hear the feelings that you have about it, and I'm going to give you my feelings as well. And we're going to have a real conversation about where we're at and what we're doing. So it was just plugging away at that, really. That's generosity, as opposed to defensiveness or being worried about covering your own back, or what happens if it goes wrong.
All right, fantastic. Any other questions? Let's type them in if you have any other questions. No? Okay, is there anything else you wanted to say, Cherie?
Not really, only just that I appreciate getting the opportunity to put some of these ideas out there, because I feel very passionate about them, and I can see that there's been a really positive impact in my context at my centre. So I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to share some of these ideas and get a discussion started, I guess.
Fantastic. There's lots of thank yous coming in, and fantastic session, and lots of support for your session, Cherie.
Thank you. So, that's fantastic.
Thanks for letting us know that.
And thanks for coming and joining. I really appreciate it.
Great. Well, I'd just like to thank you on behalf of English Australia as well. And look, these ideas were fascinating. We moved from Gandhi to the Harvard Business Review, and through ideas of authenticity and abundancy and vulnerability. So it was a really refreshing session, but also really relevant to all of us. So thank you so much, Cherie.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. And we're going to end the webinar there. So thanks for attending as well. if you have any other feedback for Cherie, you can email it through to me, and then I can pass it on, of course.
I absolutely appreciate feedback, and I'd appreciate any conversation that anyone wants to have about any of these ideas. Yeah, so
Fantastic.
Please feel free to contact me.
And there's just one comment here. Interesting to feel myself shift from a defensive position to a forward-thinking one during the session.
Oh, wonderful. Yay!
Okay, thanks to everyone for attending.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.